some of what's been said here kind of racist.
Your white opinion of racism doesn't
Racism
really.
I'm cool with it. That's a little bit racist. Latest installment of Real Conversations, Changed My Mind. The full unedited interview will be coming up soon. I know that's why you tune in. These are our segments where we have full, unedited, uncut interviews, usually involving a topic that's somewhat controversial, just to prove that you can have conversations with people. And sometimes minds can be changed, and sometimes you can part ways. And
sometimes just nothing productive happens.
Sometimes nothing productive happens. And today's a little bit different because this comes from when we were at TCU. We were doing the male privilege is a myth, which turned into a meme, changed my mind. And then I sat down with a couple of people. There were very few people willing to have a conversation that day. It was one of our less productive change my mind days. They wanted to go to the white privilege thing.
Yep.
So we'll show you.
Maybe they interpreted the sign as saying white male privilege.
Yes, white male privilege.
Yeah, that was the thing.
And we'll show you that in a bit. And that's what actually spawned a conversation between a black gentleman and an Asian gentleman. They prefer Orientals. And they did not agree with the previous black girl who was talking about white male privilege and how I was not entitled to an opinion. So we'll get to that in a bit.
Sounds like she was trying to speak on behalf of all black Americans.
Yeah, exactly. And this black guy said, like, I don't agree with that. And so he came up and he spoke and he sat down. They talked about cultural differences with this. You'll see this Asian gentleman there. And it was really fun. This is not really an argument. And actually, I think the black guy was a fan. So full disclosure. So it's not what you're used to. But I just thought it was something really cool. It was an organic conversation that warranted a watch. And I will say this, with the Real Conversations That Changed My Mind segments, we've been very happy overall with, what would we say, 70% positive, maybe?
I'd say probably more than that. It's pretty rare. I mean, I think even if you have to be a pretty hateful little booger to find this to be like an evil.
Well, yeah. I mean, there were a couple of those. There was like the guy, the white male privilege guy.
Frustrating.
SMU, they tried to run us out in a rail, which is why we're going back to perform on March 22nd.
And the feminists said it was male privilege-y.
Yes,
to do it in the first place.
But at SMU, they got pretty mad. So that was one where there were a few. They were pretty upset, and that's why we're going back on the 22nd. So book now. I would say 70%. I'm trying to be generous. 70% have been positive, and 30% have been somewhat hostile. And I will tell you this, though, any success that we've had with this segment, when we first started doing it, we said, you know what, if there's any success with this at all, if we're able to actually keep it civil and actually have the kind of conversation we want to have with people, the kind of conversation that we've always had off air with new people.
Yep.
Sometimes new hires, or sometimes when people show up to live shows, we'll sit and we'll talk to people for a long time.
Sometimes it's even just in an Uber ride or a taxi ride.
Exactly.
Around.
So if there were any level of success with this series, we would have been happy. Let alone to see how much it's been embraced by people out there, because that doesn't really happen. In the age of the clickbait title and everyone wanting to talk about controversy and Antifa, and obviously that's reality. You have to deal in reality, but you can also have these kinds of conversations that are very productive. There are two sides of that coin, and you don't really hear this other side. So we're pretty happy, I would say, overall. I mean, I would consider it something that we're probably really would consider most proud of here on this.
Most proud of it, and we kind of fell into it.
Yeah.
It really wasn't a planned thing. It was like, let's just try this. And
let's see, and we didn't expect much to come of it.
Yeah.
To the point where we get a lot of requests, probably more for this than anything else.
Yeah, we have entire campus shows and tour shows that people want to have just for Change My Mind coming to their
Just for Change My Mind, right, which is very different from the live show like we're doing at SMU on the 22nd and then Illinois in March. But we will go to different campuses and do the Change My Mind segments going forward. So first off, let's show you this was supposed to be male privilege is a myth, and this lady decided to take it a different direction.
1, 2, 3.
Jump with me, jump us with me, oh, with me, keep such fun. Jump with me.
And what are your names?
I'm Hannah.
Hannah?
Marilyn.
Hannah and Marilyn. Jared, am I good if I? Okay, Hannah and Marilyn. So it's sort of become this neologism, this idea of male privilege, and I know we talk about it a lot on campus, and I've had some conversations with people on campus today. I don't agree with the premise, but I'm open to having my mind changed.
Okay, Marilyn, go first. Well, male privilege is definitely a real thing.
Okay.
Our country country was built by white males and it was built for white males. That's why women and any minority don't have an equal chance of being in politics. That's why most of our politicians are white males instead of representative of the actual population. That's why gerrymandering exists. That's why redlining exists. White privilege and white male privilege and male privilege is a real thing.
Okay, so I want to make sure I have this clear. Do you agree with what?
Yeah,
said?
I absolutely agree.
Okay, sorry. So I'm trying to balance this with the both of you. Hope you forgive me if I'm not perfect. So, you believe that this country was founded by white males exclusively? For
I don't
white-
believe it was. I know it is.
Okay, you know it. So, what would you use to substantiate that? A lot of white males obviously came here because Western civilization. People came from Europe. A lot of white males, but that it was founded exclusively for white males. That's what you said. Yeah. How do you?
Male-dominated society.
But that doesn't imply that doesn't necessarily equate to design.
The Constitution originally didn't mention women or black people or anything or minorities or anything. It only mentioned white men. It didn't specifically say white, but it said men. They didn't give any minorities the right to anything. We had to fight for that right.
Who's we?
The minorities, women had to, people of color had to, everyone had to, except for white males.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. So you're saying that the Constitution, first off, mentioned only white men? I would say
It didn't say white men. It said men.
Mankind, men.
Man,
Yeah, this was
yes.
a term. Again, this is just sort of a colloquialism. Men. The rights were extended to women. You're aware, right?
They weren't extended to women. Women had to fight for their rights.
No, women never had to fight
Yeah.
for the freedom of
What?
speech or Second Amendment.
Well, what do you mean women didn't have to fight for these rights? They literally had marching. Women were hurt for this, like
For the First Amendment and Second Amendment, women didn't have
for
the
the
right
right
to
to
exercise it?
vote, for the right to not be treated as property.
Okay, so that's interesting that you bring up the right to vote. So you say we fought for it, everyone except for white men.
No, some white men did, but
Some
it was
white men.
mostly women.
So it
and
was mostly
honestly,
women and
it was,
minorities.
It was mostly white women at first who didn't include black women.
Okay, so who do you believe procured the right for women to vote?
Women fighting for it.
Really?
Yeah, white men wouldn't have gave it to women if they didn't fight for it.
So you believe a majority of women you believe were suffragettes, fought for the right to vote?
I don't know if it was a majority, but I know women did, and we wouldn't have it if those women hadn't stood up for it.
Okay, well, because it seems that we're going through a historical timeline. Historically, that's actually not accurate. The majority of
Historically,
women...
that is accurate.
So women actually, the majority of women didn't want the right to vote. It was men who
I
gave them the
told
right
you
to vote.
I didn't know if it was the majority, but it wouldn't have happened if women
Okay.
hadn't stood up in
Well-
the suffragist movement and fought
Well, the
for
reason
it.
I bring that up is because you said women and minorities fought for that right, not white
Yes.
men. When the fact is, women actually, as a majority, didn't fight for that right. Many of them fought against it. White men fought for that and were the ones who signed that into law.
Because of women, they wouldn't have signed it into law if women hadn't made them sign it into law.
But they didn't. The majority of women didn't want it. That's my point. And the reason they didn't want it, by the way, we'll move on from this, was because of the fact that voting came with the draft, mandatory bucket duty responsibilities that were actually not bestowed upon women at that time, and they didn't want the right to vote because it would come with the same responsibilities.
It's
So women
because-
got the right to vote, but they didn't have to be a part of the draft or mandatory bucket duty, mandatory firefighting service. So historically, I'm just saying that's actually, it's not really accurate. It paints an inaccurate picture,
I know
which
there
I would
were
disagree.
women. There was an anti-suffragist movement. I know conservative women didn't want the right to vote, but it's because of women that they were given the right to vote. And of course, there's going to be people on each side, but there's going to be women who want to stay in the home. But the whole point of women fighting for it is so they have that choice to stay in the home or go out to vote,
Sure.
or go into the draft if they want to.
Well, I don't think respectfully, you fundamentally have a misunderstanding of the draft. It's
No,
not,
go into
not
war, not
voluntary.
the draft. I don't believe in drafting anyone at all. I don't believe
at
you
the
should
time, it
fight
was
for a
a part
war
of
that
voting.
you
But at
shouldn't.
a time, it was a part of voting. That's my point. My only point here is you said it was a society designed by white men, exclusively for
Yes.
white men, and gave some examples which weren't accurate. So let me bring us to today. What rights are afforded in 2018 to men exclusively that aren't afforded to women?
It's-
And I would like both of you to answer, because I don't want you to just sit there and feel like I don't want to cut you out of this.
No, I think Marilyn's explaining it really well. I just don't think you're understanding her side and how
Okay.
she's saying that it was a two-sided thing. So there are women who want to stay at home and live that life. And there are women who wanted the right to vote, to have their voice heard and their representation.
Sure.
And I think you want to focus on the conservative side that want to stay at home, and she's trying to say,
No, not at
well,
all.
they got the option to stay at home because other women were fighting for their right to vote.
No, that's not what I was presenting from my side at all.
Yes, it was.
No, let me clarify one more time then, okay? And I want to make it really clear, not only for you, for anyone watching. You said this was a society created by white men exclusively for white men. And women and minorities had to fight for these rights, and you use examples as voting, and white men didn't. What I am pointing out is that is inaccurate. White men did. Most women didn't want it. So that's a false
doesn't mean
premise
they
that
don't.
paints a false it's a false baseline for today. Because if you say at one point, now I think women should have the right to vote. I'm very glad that we all do. Okay, we can agree on that. What I can't agree with is something that is historically inaccurate. So I'd like to find something we agree on today. What rights today in 2018 are afforded to men that are not afforded to women? I don't believe that there's systemic male privilege today. I'm not saying I could be wrong. I don't believe it though. And I would like to be convinced, or I'm certainly open to being convinced.
I feel your male privilege is a myth. I feel like only white men have that male privilege, and that's what the focus should be on.
Okay, so there's no black male privilege.
No.
Okay. We have some black men actually in the audience. Maybe they can come in afterwards. I would be interested to hear their perspective. So white male privilege.
Yes.
Okay. So what systemic white male privilege exists today? What rights are afforded, for example, to white males that are not afforded to black males, or to white males not afforded to black females? Let's divide everyone by race and gender at this point.
In regards to like laws and things like that, obviously the laws aren't like, oh, white men get this privilege and blah 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 blah. So in regards to like technical terms, it says like men. It's laid out by laws really equally. When it comes to the actual systems, there's tons of black men crowding jails for an eighth of weed, while white men have like weed parties and it's cool and that's their thing, but like black men are automatically arrested for it. So that goes into the whole like police brutality argument. But
So can I ask you that? I've never heard of a weed party.
you can ask one of them.
Oh yeah, you can ask.
You mean one of the white males?
Probably.
Yeah. No, I don't. It's okay. We'll have someone come in afterwards and they can explain to me a weed party. So, no, genuinely, this is not me being a smart.
Kind of parties fraternity brothers throw.
I'm sure they do, but the premise was the idea, right, that black men are in prison for an eighth of weed. Do you have any statistical data to prove that black men with nothing more than an eighth of weed go to prison?
I couldn't give you the exact statistics, but there's several accounts of it, and it's not unknown. It's pretty much common sense that blacks are way easily more arrested than white men.
Well, apparently it's also been common sense that the majority of women were pushing for the right to vote and that white men didn't support them. So we're trying to deconstruct some of these ideas that people maybe assume are common sense but are factually inaccurate. Now, the truth is men as a whole are much more likely to be incarcerated than women. Men as a whole, even white men, get far more harsh sentencing for the same crime as women.
White men are shooting up schools, so I think they should have a harsher punishment.
Well, hold on a second. I mean, hold on a second, but black men are shooting each other in record numbers as well. That's not really relevant to the point.
You were asking for the facts, and they're right here.
Let me see.
Here's the facts.
Okay, so hold on one second. From the NAACP, you said for an eighth of. I want to make sure we're really clear here. You said white men are having weed parties, and a black man with an eighth of weed will be incarcerated in a federal prison. So what I have here is your source from the NAACP.
I mean, there's multiple.
From the NAACP, in 2014, African Americans constituted 2.3 million, or 34%, 64% of the correctional population. Okay, African Americans are incarcerated at more than 5 times the rate of whites. Now, nothing here at all involves behaviors or crimes committed. I'm trying to look for anything in here that relates to black people being sentenced simply for an eighth of weed. So this is from the NAACP. That would be as biased of a source as you could use.
Bias? What?
But I don't see it. I don't see it. Show me, I would like to see,
I would be very open to hearing the statistical reality. I'm not trying to be confrontational. I would like to hear that stat. I think it's horrible. I don't think anyone should be arrested for an eighth of weed or put in jail. I think we can agree on that, right?
No, I agree.
Whether they're white or black.
Yeah.
I don't think white people should be shooting up schools, whether they're white or black.
Yeah. Well, I definitely agree.
Obviously, welcome to listen to whatever's happening over here and continue to do that. But we're going to have a conversation over here about campus climate, sexual assault, and...
Why don't you come talk?
Why don't you come talk? Got it. I'm just saying that we're going to be over here. Great, thank you. I'll come over and talk with you guys too. This is where it counts. Okay, so let's assume that will... And sorry, I hope you're still comfortable. I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable.
No, it's fine.
I feel this has been respectful, and you've been very polite. So again, the systemic differences we're talking about, men, period, are more likely to be incarcerated than women.
Yeah.
Men are more likely to be physically assaulted than women. So we're getting into this. First off, this is data. But when we get into the anecdotal that, white men tend to have it better because they can walk around and have weed parties, that's not necessarily accurate. So particularly when we're discussing an issue as sensitive as race, gender, and systemic oppression or inequalities, don't you think it's really important that we get that correct and the premise correct before we go off and divide people by these subcategories?
Yeah, but I think there's tons of statistics out there already. And even if you don't want to look up the statistics, it's not hard to see how many black men are in jail at larger rates than white men.
Do black men commit crimes at a higher rate than men?
Definitely not. That's
No.
just not true.
No?
No.
No, so black men do not commit crimes at a higher rate than white males?
No.
Okay. Do you have statistics that would reflect that?
I mean, I'm sure I could look them up, but it's definitely not true. It's because racism is built into the system. That's what the system is built against blacks, and that's what racism is. That's why there are more blacks in prison.
Okay. Well, it seems like we've gotten away from male privilege, now we've gotten to black-white. But I'll go with that if you'd like to. And I don't disagree that there have been horrible instances of racism in this country, including, by the way, in Canada and, of course, in Europe, the British Empire. And by the way, I hope you understand I'm certainly not a slavery or racism apologist. I think that's bad. I think racism is bad. But you just mentioned that, someone else was just earlier was saying that I was okay with rape, which I'm not, simply because I believe there needs to be proof for rape. So I think racism is bad. If we can all agree that racism is bad, you say the systems are racist and set up. Okay. What systematic racism do we have today, then, in that case?
The system is built against. So it all goes back to slavery. Colored people of color. Sorry, have never been.
Careful. Colored people. It's people of color. One's racist. One's okay now.
Yes, people of color is the correct term. People of color have never been given an equal opportunity. They've never been given the equal opportunity for jobs because after racism was abolished, came segregation and then Jim Crow and separate but equal. So people of color have never been given the same opportunity as white people, which is why it's been built into the system.
In 2018, do you believe that's true?
Yes, it's still.
Can I ask you? Can I ask you a question? You're here at. Did you go to TCU?
Yes.
Okay. At TCU, do you know if there is any affirmative action, for example, grants exclusively given to people of African American heritage?
I'm not sure if we have in place affirmative action, but I know we do have the chancellor's. What is it called?
The community scholars?
Community scholars, yeah, which is put in place to help get minorities into college.
Right. So so there are grants and scholarships. I think we would agree across this country for minorities. Yeah.
And those wouldn't have to exist if it wasn't the system.
But will we not say that's?
If the system was equal, then those scholarships wouldn't exist, which is why we have to have those scholarships.
So I just want to make sure that I understand these scholarships correctly because I don't attend the school. So these are, you said it's the community grant for is that what it's called?
Community scholar.
Community scholar, and this is exclusively for minorities to try and get them on campus.
It's not exclusively for minorities. There is.
It's majority minorities, but you can be any race and get this scholarship.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is something specifically to the school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mostly if you come from a lower economic standpoint.
From a lower economic standpoint. Okay. Are there or are there not grants, for example, or laws in place, we know affirmative action, that would be granted exclusively toward minorities? It seems in this case this one may not, but are you aware that those exist on campus?
Yes.
Okay. So when you say minority, that would be excluding people who are not minorities for this grant or scholarship, correct?
Yes.
Is that discriminatory?
No, because it's fighting against the system of racism.
Well, I'm not asking about the system of racism. I'm asking is, by definition, is that discriminating against groups of people for this grant?
No.
What is the definition of the word discrimination?
Let me look it up.
Okay. I would venture would be something along the lines of discerning or excluding certain parameters or qualities from a given opportunity.
Unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people or things, especially on the grounds of race, age, or sex.
Okay. So excluding people based on race.
It says unjust or prejudicial.
This is from Merriam-Webster.
It's from.
Okay. Here, I appreciate it. So the point is there's discrimination occurring there. Is there anything like that for white students?
Unjust. That's not unjust because it's making it equal for minorities.
It's making it equal.
Yes, because they don't have an equal chance in our society.
How do they not have an equal chance to get to TCU?
What do you think? We're trying to explain to you right now. What have we been talking about this whole time?
Well, I'm looking at several black people here who've made it to TCU.
Several black people? I'm looking at a sea of white. I don't know what you're looking at.
I guess you're a figment of our imagination. Well, hold on a second. Sorry, you're Asian, so I guess you don't count because there are too many of you on campus. I'm saying I'm looking at many. There's a guy biracial right here. No, listen, there have been people coming in and out. The point is, many of these people disagree. They believe they can get into to school. They don't believe there's systemic discrimination.
More white people that can get in, so there's more white people.
There are more white people in this area of town, and we've gotten away from male privilege. We talked about white privilege versus black privilege. Is not what we're talking about. Or people of color. Is people of color, is that the term you prefer?
Sure.
Well, I don't know. I know some people prefer black, some people prefer people of color. I would like to go back to the idea of male privilege. I still haven't heard a right afforded, or same thing with race. I still haven't heard a right afforded to someone who is a white male not afforded to, say, a black female. I think that's pivotal if we're going to talk about systemic discrimination. Sorry, my knee touched you. I apologize. I meant nothing by it. I just have wide legs. But we don't agree that that's pivotal. If we're going to say there is systemic discrimination that needs to be rectified, we would need to be able to find in 2018 at least one example of systemic discrimination.
Okay. How many of our presidents have been white and male?
The last one was black.
One out
Yeah.
of 45. 1 out of 45.
And I would argue he was terrible.
I would definitely not argue that. I'd argue Obama was one of our best presidents.
Okay. That's fine. And isn't it wonderful you can have that opinion, right? You can have that opinion and I can have my opinion, but wouldn't that be proof that there are no more barriers to entry if a black man made it to the highest office in the land?
There's a study by I forget what his name is.
Relax.
Does she seem nervous? Is that
No, him. He needs to relax.
Oh, he needs to relax. What did he do?
I mean, she's trying to get her point across. He just needs to let her say it, and
Relax.
it'll be fine.
There's lots of countries where they elected one minority president and then went all the way back to electing all white presidents. They say they're
Careful, because you're treading on some ground that could make you sound very racist here, and I don't think you're aware of it.
Maryland's not going to come across
No.
racist.
Yeah, some of what's been said here kind of racist.
Your white
Well,
opinion of
excuse me.
racism doesn't
racism
really
is a system.
compare.
That's kind of that's a little that's
Okay.
I'm cool with it.
I
That's
just
a little
wanna-
bit racist.
Okay, I just want to get out here that reverse racism isn't real. I know you're all going to yell at me.
No, I didn't. No. Listen, I would never use the word reverse racism. Saying your white opinion of racism doesn't matter is not reverse racism at all.
No,
It's
not that it
racism.
doesn't matter. It's just it doesn't compare.
Okay, how so?
Like
How
you're
would my
trying to
opinion
tell
be-
her what she's saying is racist. That's
No,
like
I said it could come across racist saying they never vote in another black president again. How people don't ever vote back. You know, that could come across as racist.
How?
Because of such a poor performance from a black president would be the implication.
it
But his
wasn't
poor
I don't think
performance
you're
is like
racist.
your
I
opinion.
don't, exactly, it is my opinion. And it was the opinion of many, many millions of Americans who voted in an old white guy, unfortunately, over a woman. Sorry, maybe we'll have a female president next go around. I'd gladly vote for a female president. I actually was a Carly Fiorina guy. I really liked her. I think she would have made a fantastic president. But I do find it interesting right here where you just said that your white opinion isn't comparable. I don't. The word comparable is interesting to me. Why would you use that choice of words?
Because what is your understanding of racism in comparison to somebody who's a person of color?
We're both human beings with opinions on an issue.
Yeah, but you play into the system and we're trying to fight against it. So why would
How would you know that I play into this? How do I play into the system?
you're a conservative Republican? Like you
You don't know anything about me.
You're sitting here saying that male privilege is a myth
Yeah.
and that rape culture isn't a problem on U.S. campuses.
And so you just said I am a part of a system which you just declared racist. You said I'm an active part in a racist system. That's a really terrible thing to say about somebody.
Well, is it
It's true.
untrue?
Yes.
No, it's not.
Then prove it.
Well, you want me to prove? Okay, you want me to disprove your prejudicial statement based on my race? Let me give you my best shot. I'm actually a French Canadian, or an English Canadian who was raised in French Canada. Are you aware of the language police?
No.
Okay, so let me talk to you about a little bit about discrimination. We're actually not allowed to attend English schools. We're not allowed to open a restaurant with an English sign if there's an apostrophe S. They thought I was disabled until the 4th grade because I was forced to go to French schools and learn math, geography, and history in French by law, because if you are born in Quebec, you have to attend French schools. This comes from a theory they call pure laine, which means pure wool, pure European French blood wool. And so this is actually something, it's enforced by the language police. Where I grew up, they thought I was learning disabled as an English Canadian, being forced to go to public Catholic schools at a Protestant English-speaking Canadian, and they thought I was learning disabled until the 4th grade. I lived in an 82 Datsun for several months as I tried to make something of myself and dropped out of college and moved to the United States when I was 18 years old. So I certainly wouldn't say that I'm someone who's been raised in the lap of white American Republican privilege. By the way, there are no Republicans in Quebec. There are only liberals and liberal separatists.
None of what you said had to do with racism or anything.
It had to
at
do with
all.
discrimination, with prejudice.
Okay.
I would say there's an English-speaking.
But you're still a white man in this society, so you're good. Your privilege is safe.
I would say this, and you're not going to like this, but I would say a white male, regardless of white, male, black, I would say white-speaking English Canadian living, being raised in French Canada, yes, would face much more systemic oppression than you here on college campus.
Really? So it's easier being you, a white person in America, than me, a white person?
No.
Half white person in America.
You're a half-white person in America? No, I was talking about my upbringing because you said you're playing into the system. You're a white male conservative Republican.
Yeah, I don't care about
What if
the
I were a
background.
what if I were a white male Democrat? What if I were a transgender
Then I would hope that you would
Democrat?
be fighting the system.
What system?
And trying to
We said
change
the
it.
what system?
The systematic racism
What's
in
systematic
America.
racism? I just need one example of systematic
Police
racism.
brutality.
Okay, police brutality. No,
mean-
listen, ignore them. We're just having a conversation. And the peanut gallery doesn't matter. Okay, it's okay. I'm not laughing at you. I'm not being disrespectful.
No,
today.
I
I
get
don't
it.
associate
I
me with
get
them. I'm not. That's what I'm saying. I'm just saying I want to just keep it here so that it's not fair if there's a pile on, and I want everyone to take their turn. So I appreciate it. Police brutality. That's interesting. Again, with the sign is about male privilege, but you seem to really focus on the race issue. So let's talk about police brutality. How is that? So the example of the system that you say I play into here proactively in America, police brutality is an example of systemic discrimination, white male privilege.
Yes.
How so?
Because black men are killed at traffic stops, black women included. I mean, there are unjust killings in jail that mysteriously, these men kill young black men and then walk free. Like, your life and your privilege is fine, but black people are dying.
So you believe that it's okay, it's legal to kill an innocent black male and it's happening in record numbers
Yes.
because we're white?
Not because you're white, but because the system is racist.
What if I were to tell you that statistically that's untrue?
Then I would want to know the statistic.
Yeah, what if I tell you that actually white males are more likely to be shot by police?
Okay, why wasn't the Florida shooter shot dead then?
Well, we're getting into the anecdotal.
Okay.
So statistically, empirical data would say that actually white males are more likely to be shot by the police.
Okay. But I just completely disagree with that, and I don't know where your statistic is coming from.
Okay. Well, I think we have some other people who would like to discuss, but
Okay.
if you disagree with the statistics, we have them up on the website. I think it's horrible if anyone is shot, an innocent person
Yeah.
shot by the police.
No,
I think we can use
totally.
better training with a lot of police officers. De-escalation,
Absolutely.
I think that should be used with white or black people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one thing, if I may, because, sorry, did I step on your foot?
No, you're fine.
Oh, there's a walnut here. One thing, if I may, if the goal is to have a conversation, I really do want to have a conversation. I've tried to be respectful. Just as I'm sure you would probably be more defensive or less capable of having a civil dialogue with someone if they said, well, you can't possibly understand because you're a black woman, you don't know anything about this. I'm sure right away you might say, well, hold on, what do you mean by that? Coming into a conversation with someone where you don't have empirical data or evidence, I presented some, you've disagreed with some, you haven't presented much of your own, but saying that someone's opinion simply isn't comparable because they're a white male, A, is not a valid argument. I hope that's not one that's taught as okay in college, and it's also not something that's going to convert anyone to your way of thinking. You know, the idea is to change my mind. I will tell you, I appreciate you sitting down and doing it, but that is probably the least effective way to enter a conversation if you're looking to change someone's mind, to say you're wrong or you don't know because you're a white male. So I would hope that moving forward that maybe you might reconsider your tact, because you seem like you seem very much like a nice lady. I don't think you're aware of that, but it shuts down dialogue before it begins as opposed to encouraging it.
She was, I think, I'm not going to say what she was trying to say, but I'm going to say I think what she was trying to say is you don't understand what it is like to be oppressed because you are a white male. White males are not oppressed.
Yeah. First off, I'd like her to explain her position.
No,
you don't
I
need to
agree
explain
exactly
it for
with
her.
what Marilyn said.
It seems a little like, what do we call it, white-splaining?
I told her, I said I think this is what she was trying to say. That's why I didn't say I think this is what she said.
But do you not believe that she can articulate? I don't want her to feel as though she's being misrepresented. I'd
I
like her to
don't.
articulate her own thoughts.
I feel totally fine. I agree with what Marilyn said, and that was what I was saying.
Let me ask you this, because we've talked about data, we've talked about the facts, which you said you don't have in front of you, but let's not take my word for it. So you just said white men can't know what it's like to be oppressed. Do you believe that as an emphatic, factual statement, that there are no white men in this country who could know what it's like to be oppressed, or maybe haven't had some hard breaks?
They've had hard times, but they're definitely not oppressed.
Okay, that's fair. I appreciate it. I would disagree. I think everyone has privilege in different facets, and I think on campus, I think women and people of minority people have privilege that the average white male here probably doesn't.
What privileges do we have that they don't?
Scholarships, grants, the ability to
They
shout
have-
people down, tell
I
them they don't
earned-
have a
no,
right
no,
to an
no.
opinion because they're a
No.
white male.
No.
I would never even dream of telling either of you that your
No,
opinion
wait.
isn't valid because
Stop.
you're a
Stop.
woman,
Stop talking.
you're black.
Stop talking.
No, that's not allowed. You're not allowed to tell me to stop talking. Sorry. If I were to do that, you'd say that that's white male privilege. So I appreciate it. The conversation is kind of over. It's not going anywhere.
No, it's not over,
Thank you.
actually.
It's over.
How are
Thank
we-
you.
How are we given scholarships that all these other people didn't have the right to get? We earned that. We were in the top of our class. That's how we earned those scholarships. We were smart. We were smarter than them. That's how we earned them.
Well, then
We
what?
weren't given it 'cause we're
Then let's
women
just
or 'cause
great.
we're minorities.
I think everyone on here is on board with scholarships for the smartest people in any class.
You just said that's
Male,
one way we have
male,
privilege.
female, black, or white. I don't think race or sex should even come into the equation. So good, we agree. We found common ground. Thank you very much.
That's-
Now, like you said, she just sort of, I guess, claimed the mantle of all black people, though.
She was black-splaining.
Yes, she was black-splaining, which I wouldn't know if she were because I'm white. If you're black-splaining, it's probably out of necessity. Sometimes I find myself going down a rabbit hole of the internet. You know, I know that there are some white Americans who are completely out of touch with black culture. Sometimes I go over to World Star Hip Hop. It's like a whole new world. I'm not gonna lie.
It is. It's like it's one of those things. You're like, this has been going on this entire time.
This is
even when I'm not watching, this is still a thing.
all right. Okay.
I think
I'll
about
be
that.
out of touch, but this was really cool. A black guy and an Asian guy who were there. And one thing I will say too with the Change My Mind segments, we've talked about how the left is willing to just boom, shout out and yell a lot, and we'll go 3 hours sometimes, like 45 minutes, 2 hours. 3 hours is exaggerating. Call it 45 minutes, 2 hours, no one. And then one person sits down, and then liberal professors and students, you've seen it, they start yelling.
Yep.
In this instance, there were a couple of times where I was talking with them, those two girls there, and I don't know, I said something, I made some point, and someone chimed in who was on the right, more conservative leaning, and I said, "Hey guys, listen, I don't want to do a pylon. Let's let them finish their thought." And you could, I don't know if we have a shot of the audience. You could see the audience, the conservatives going, and everyone got quiet.
Yeah.
They didn't go, "Oh damn," and jump in. They all went, "Yeah, you know what? That's right. The whole purpose of this is two people having a conversation." And that to me, again, it was just something I thought, wow, this is really cool. People actually acknowledging, yeah, we don't want to be cowards.
I think that is something that's kind of been an illuminating thing for me, is seeing in action, in play, this idea that the mob mentality of the left, where they kind of have to congregate together to
Right.
bully and overpower somebody else's voice to kind of shout someone else down. Whereas conservatives, I think, tend to be more apt to just saying, hey, let's let it breathe. Let's see what happens here.
Yeah.
Back off. Let's let these two people discuss our ideas because we believe in the ideas. We don't think we have to shout someone down
Right.
until they concede. We just think, let's see the ideas play out.
Yeah, and you see that a lot. We were obviously the teachers called the patriarchy. They called the police on us, even though we had permits. So this has happened. We've had permits, at SMU and at TCU, and we were in, I believe, in Vermont. And it doesn't matter sometimes. So that's why we have the permit. We're running out the big theater on March 22nd to do SMU, and it can try and run us out in the rails. We welcome it, but. So that was pretty cool. And then this organic conversation was sort of, it spawned from basically a black guy saying, I don't agree. And okay, you want to come out and you want to talk about it? And then an Asian guy saying, like, actually, my family, they're first generation immigrants, and I don't agree with a lot of the stuff she said. I said, okay, do you want to come out? And then we were bridging the racial divide. Like heroin, it brings people of all different colors and creeds together in its warm embrace. So enjoy this. I guess unpredictable. It was not something that we had. An impromptu, non-frontation changed my mind with a black and an Oriental.
Saying somebody step up and take their shot. Yeah.
Oh. Let me. You know what? Could you sit down for a second? Sure. Token black eye. I'm joking. What's your name, man? Sean. All right, Sean. So Sean, I find this. Do you agree with what was just stated there as a black male?
No.
Okay, you didn't even have to think about it. With what part do you disagree?
Well, first off, the statistics about like black crime and police brutality overly affecting black males. I mean, we have to look at crime statistics. So yes, black males are overrepresented in prisons, but black males are also overrepresented in crime statistics. So black males are like 6% of the 6 or 7% of the population.
Right.
6% of the population because black females are 7% of the population.
I think as total it's somewhere around 13.
Yeah, total is 13.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, if you take all that into account, then you have to consider, okay, so why are they overrepresented in crime? And the reason why, I mean, in my opinion, a lot of it is economic, a lot of it is cultural, a lot of it is the opportunities available in their areas. And people can make the argument that it's because of white oppression. I don't necessarily think it's because of white oppression. I think it has a lot to do with the welfare state. I think it has a lot to do with democratic policies and liberal policies, pushing agendas upon black people instead of giving them agency and allowing them to make their own decisions.
She left. I was hoping that she would actually hear what you have to say here. Let me ask you, do you attend TCU?
I do.
How did you get in?
I spent 9 years in the Air Force and got a scholarship, 4-hour scholarship.
Thank you for your service. Appreciate it. And what are you studying?
Psychology and philosophy, so I'm actually on the
psychology on the liberal arts side, yeah. Well, listen, if you make less than a civil engineer, don't blame it on a white-black thing. You chose a degree that's kind of rough.
I just want to enjoy my career, whatever it is.
There you go. Well, listen, that sounds like something that would be, especially after 8 years in the Air Force?
9 years.
9 years, geez. Sorry, look, someone's like, 9. Yeah. Get it right. So you were in the Air Force, this is what got your scholarship. Do you believe that your path was more difficult to TCU exclusively because of your race?
No, I don't think it's because of my race. I think it's because, I was raised by a single mother. My dad left when I was really young.
Sorry.
My mom had to work really hard to, just get me through school. I made really poor decisions early on in life, and the military was really the only way I could go. And honestly, I learned a lot in the military. I got a lot of, I learned responsibility. I learned taking responsibility for my own actions, and I learned agency and taking pride in myself and work hard. Yeah.
How do you feel about, I'm not totally aware of the scholarship specifically to TCU, but I think everyone is well aware of, and we can agree that there are scholarships obviously afforded exclusively to minorities or women not afforded to, say, the white male. How do you feel about that as a black man? Do you think that helps?
No. Actually, we were just talking about this. Actually, I was.
Well, the Asian, you can't talk with him. They're over. They'd be dominating every math and science department there is.
So I just came from the Bay Area.
Got to build a wall around their neighborhood just so we can keep some people getting degrees. For crying out loud.
It's that Asian privilege.
Yeah, I know.
I just came from the Bay Area in Silicon Valley, and I mean, you see there, like, Asian prosperity is huge.
Oh, yeah.
They're doing really well, and like, good on them. And I think, like, honestly, if the black culture adopted a lot of those tenets of like Asian culture and like, hey, suck it up, like go out there and get it and do it yourself. And like, it was interesting, like a lot of rappers supported Trump, And they said the reason why is because they said, that's what Trump is about. He's like, go out there and get it, make your money, do what you have to do to make your money.
Right.
And I think like that's, people talk about that, but they don't really go out and do it. And like, there's not a lot of talk about different ways and diversifying your means of income.
Yeah.
There are a lot of opportunities out there if you just go out there and look for them and get it. And honestly, like people are willing to give black people opportunities.
Well, and I'm sure, here's the deal. I understand that there are racists out there.
Oh, yeah,
and I think it's kind of like a child who just misbehaves so often you have to discipline them. You kind of see this with the left. Like if a child behaves well, okay, you don't have to correct them all the time. But when the left constantly just divides by race and by gender, then you have to bounce back and say, well, hold on a second. No, that's actually inaccurate. The truth is, it kind of bars us, it robs us of our ability to be empathetic to someone saying, yeah, you know what, I'm sure you get some tough breaks as a black guy, because we're constantly being told you can't understand and you've gotten everything because you're a white guy. I think it actually burns more bridges than it builds.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think Asians think when they're saying you're too much? They're actually that, they only allot a certain amount of Asians in certain programs. I'm sure you're aware of this.
I punished 3 to 5 ACT points, 0.5 GPA going into college. Like, I applied to USC. Me and my friend, he's African American, I'm white. He's Asian. Basically had the same exact demographics.
You forgot?
I grew up in white America. And I had a 32 and a 4.5, and he had a 27 and like a 3.8. He got it and I didn't get in. And we had basically the exact same everything else, just because he was African American and I was Asian, and I got penalized because of my privilege, because there's overrepresented high academic scholarship.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Actually, here, if you want to come up, no, you can stay here. Both. Let's get like a buddy cop film. Sorry. What was your name, sir? David. Sorry, my hands are freezing. Hold on, the lists aren't blue. It's funny that you mentioned that about your ACT scores and how your friend who was African American got in and you didn't. This is one thing that I've always, and I'm glad we finally, we can bridge this racial divide. It's like the black and white cookie, Seinfeld. When you think about that, right, they start locking Asians out because you guys do very, very well academically. Yeah. What do you think that does to the relationship between Asian Americans and black Americans? That's always a concern of mine. I mean, the same thing with white Americans, but particularly, listen, I grew up in Canada, and I'm not gonna lie, a lot of Asians behind closed doors, a little bit racist in Canada. I'm sure there's some of that here too. It seems like it would strain relationships, not really bring people together.
Yeah, I know that because the Asian culture is very academics first, like academics, averages. Like with the whole shaming your family kind of concept you see with white culture,
right?
Like white media, like they talk about, why you not doctor yet? That comes kind of stuff, which is actually can be very true. So and I know the African American, especially in the inner cities, academic excellence achievement is very shunned upon, especially with the gangs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think that creates a big divide, especially on the income ethnic the top four ethnic groups in America. The top earners are all Asians, Indians, Japanese, Thai.
Yeah.
And the bottom tiers are African Americans and Hispanics. And I think it's just it's not because of the systematic racism in America. I think it's all culture. Well, he said his dad left. I'm really sorry about that. But the African American single motherhood rate during the civil rights movement was 13-15% depending on the city, whereas now it's upwards of 70 to 80% in the inner cities, and that's not because of racism from white people. That's because of the shift in culture in the inner cities.
Let me ask you, do you agree with what he's saying there?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the soft bigotry of low expectations. When you tell people that, you can't do anything in life because you have this overlord above you oppressing you, then what is your, you're not gonna have any optimism. You're not gonna have any aspirations to achieve anything in life.
Right.
Because you're what's the point? And I think that's told more to black males than it is black females, because there's a statistic that just came out that black females are actually the most educated minority group per capita in the United States.
I did read that, yeah.
Which is insane. You think about it, it's how are they oppressed if they're, having,
Unfortunately, that statistic, if you dig into it, includes a lot of the gender studies and that kind of stuff, and then you're like, well, educated.
Yeah. I mean, that's what does educated mean?
Let me ask you this, because you mentioned sort of cultural differences. If I may ask a personal question, you don't have to answer it, but I appreciate your candor. You talked about sort of the culture of academics. There's also, there's an argument to be made that obviously, specifically Chinese, the language is more mathematical, so you have more of an advantage there, right? And that's actually kind of true. Have you ever read The Tipping Point? Where it talks about actually the difference in crops between corn and rice, and how sensitive rice is and how meticulous you have to be when you're cultivating rice versus corn, which is kind of a yield anything crop. So there are cultural differences there that would place emphasis on mathematics, on sciences, but there is a very notable cultural difference, as you talked about, with families where fathers tend to stay in the household with Asian families. So let me ask this, given all the other cultural differences, and this is why I ask, I know you brought it up yourself that you were single mother household, do you think that having a family structure like he had, having your father be there, would have been probably the biggest determining factor in giving you a leg up compared to everything else we've discussed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. Just having that kind of like that like stern kind of figure in your life, that that stability there.
Right.
I definitely think it would have helped, because I didn't. And people talk about like there's no biological factor to gender, and that's absurd, because having a man in the house has a completely different impression on children than otherwise. Because when my uncles would come over, I would kind of tighten up right away, like, oh, don't act out.
Yeah.
And I think most people that have fathers in the household, like that's their that's kind of the rock. I mean, most men or boys, when they get into puberty, like they're not really afraid of their mother anymore. I mean, I definitely wasn't. So yeah.
I was. My mom was French
Canadian. Mom on the show.
Yeah, she's French Canadian. She'd give me a swat if I needed one.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Earlier, you said something too. You were both sitting there and you were kind of laughing. You said something to the effect of, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. You said something like, "I'm black but people don't think I am once I speak."
Yeah.
What do you? It's interesting that you said that, and you were so. What do you mean by that?
So I grew up in California, so speaking without ebonics, without slang, isn't abnormal there. But as soon as I was stationed in Louisiana for 6 years, and when I got to Louisiana, I would walk into any McDonald's or whatever, and immediately they'd be like, "You're not from around here, are you?"
Yeah.
And no, I'm not.
No.
Okay.
Well, it's also because it's Louisiana. Like you're from a
yeah.
socialist state. Yeah, that's probably what they smelled it on you. No, listen, it's not like all black guys in California. I mean, I lived in Inglewood for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, I
I
saw
mean,
Straight Outta Compton. I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I know
I grew up in Richmond. Coach Carter. I don't know if you ever seen the movie.
Yeah, Coach Carter.
That's where I grew up.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sure. So, well, it's just interesting that you say that. Do you feel as though, like you've talked about this, right, with Asians?
Yeah.
How there's you feel there are expectations and pressures.
Yeah.
Within your family to be.
Yeah, and throughout history, like you look back at like Asian culture throughout like the early ages, through like China, it's like the family structure is so sound, and like the whole fact that you have to prove, like you have to like show your worth to your family.
Yeah.
Like, or you're disowned.
You have to earn it.
I mean, there's a reason why South Korea and Japan have the two highest suicide rates in the entire world.
I knew it was Japan. I didn't know South Korea was.
South Korea's higher. South Korea.
Really?
We have one of the hardest high school like curriculums, and there's a placement test that basically tells you where you go in life. And so the suicide rate after that test scores come out is so astronomically high compared to like all the.
I can imagine.
So.
Oh no, janitor!
Ah! Exactly, and so like, and it's just like they feel like so like they look light on their family, like it's just like they are the.
Well, first off, I don't think that's necessarily healthy. Okay, I'm not saying, but I am saying, but it is clearly, obviously, an indicator of
cutthroat culture,
academic pursuits and performance. I just find it interesting because he mentioned the pressures on them, and then you mentioned, I don't sound black. So you feel, whether you realize it to some varying degree, pressures to sound a certain way. So it's similar to the Asian pressures, but what are the pressures there? How are you expected to sound? And where would you see those external pressures come from?
It's honestly, I got it from growing up, especially. And like I said, I didn't do that well early on in life in school. And a lot of that was because of the pressures. It was like, you better not be a nerd. If you're a nerd, you're getting beat up.
Right.
That's just the way it is.
Right.
So you can't like things that aren't, stereotypical for the culture. So if you like country music, I don't necessarily like country music, but if I were to like country music, that would be a problem.
I'm gonna say, it's okay, there aren't any other black guys around. Okay. You can walk home safely tonight on campus. That guy said he liked the Zac Brown band. Get him.
Yeah. So yeah, like things like that, or like after school activities, things like that. If you stick around after school, you're not cool anymore.
Right.
And it's more cool to like cut class and get with girls, and that's
Well, and let me ask you this: would you say that these pressures you talked about within your families, within your society, would you say that shaped your behavior as a young person more than, say, I don't know, Bernie Sanders' recent vote in the Senate floor?
Yes.
Yeah.
You grow up like mimicking your parents are your biggest role models in life. I mean, I would hope for most people, like you would, if your parents are successful or they at least show that they're successful, that's something you want to imitate. And if you don't have a family structure that like supports you and like shows you what's right or wrong, you're going to grow up doing what you think is right or wrong.
Right.
And without that development, your right or wrong is going to be all about you.
Right.
And you're going to be so egotistically self-centered, like you're going to be only thinking about yourself. That's when crime happens. That's when you like murders. That's when people that like they feel like, or they're oppressed because this just everything's against them, or it's in fact it's just them.
It is. That's one thing we've noticed in speaking with the more leftist students, who I appreciate that they came forward. But is this sort of What is this? He's raising his. Oh, that's okay. He can take a picture of me. I don't care. I don't have to charge him for it. You know, these pressures, and people seem to confuse that because that's sort of anecdotal, but it's anecdotal in the sense that it's anecdotal within, like you're saying, the prism of your race. There are certain pressures that come with being a black person, certain culture as an Asian person, and they seem to conflate that with systemic discrimination. One constant we've noticed today is not a single person could list us an actual right, an actual systemic form of oppression, and so they go to the anecdotal. And it's funny, that's one thing I would readily acknowledge. If you were to say, for example, hey, you know what, one thing you don't really know as a white guy, I'll tell you, is being raised as a black kid in an area of California in a single mother household. You know, it was hard for me if I wanted to study or do these because I would have been made fun of. That's just not, or if you were to say, hey man, one thing you don't really understand as a white guy is, you know, my mom locked me in a closet and beat the shit out of me with reeds if I didn't, you know, do my math homework. I would say, oh, wow, that's interesting. Let's have a discussion. But instead, it's just you can't possibly understand because of a system. And you're playing into a systemic form of oppression. I will tell you this, really, we don't have those kinds of pressures as white people. I think we'd all readily acknowledge that. We don't have certain expectations of us as white people, except, ironically enough, the one sort of consistent pressurized ecosystem right now for white people is a pressure to feel guilty. And that's what we've had today. Everyone who's come up has tried to tell me to feel guilty for being a white male, to feel guilty for a rape that may or may not have occurred with no proof, to feel guilty because someone was sitting here who was a black female. That's the pressure we get, and that's not healthy because it just creates resentment.
So I'd say if you do want to debate about anything, I will say if there is a white privilege, that is the white privilege, that you aren't dictated to based on your race.
Yeah.
With the Enlightenment, you got individuality. You can be yourself. You can be whoever you want to be. And people can judge you for it, but, you know, like it's no big deal. Like, it's okay to be whoever you want to be.
Right.
And I don't think that's the case for a lot of minority groups.
I think that's true, and I think that would be an interesting converation to have. And I think we just kind of had it. But like, the only system of oppression now is guilt. We're expected to feel guilty.
Yeah.
You're black people. If let's say you do really well for yourself, none of your black friends are going to be like, man, you got that from a system of oppression. You just played into the system. And they're like,
if anything, they'll say, now you owe the community, which is, you know, why you see a lot of rappers are like, I'm going to move away from it. I don't want to give them money.
Was it Ice Cube or Ice-T who moved back? And then he moved away 3 months later. He's like, you know, I went back and tried to help my community, but turns out my community really likes to steal my and he left. Yeah, so, well listen, this is totally off topic from what we were doing, but I heard them speaking on your behalf as minorities, and man, I appreciate you guys sitting down and talking. This is awesome. Thank you, man. And thank you for your service. Thank you. Hey, did you enjoy this video? Here's the thing, you're here, this is the end of it, so we don't care because you already watched it. But if you really didn't like it and you want to justify it, leave a comment below telling us why you didn't like the video. And if you liked us, let us know, and subscribe to the channel, because that lets the overlords at YouTube know that, you know what? You're all right.